Alice glanced nervously along the table as she walked up the large hall and noticed that there were about 50 guests of all kinds. Some were animals, some birds, and there were even a few flowers among them. "Oh, I'm glad they've come without waiting to be asked," she thought. "I should never have known who were the right people to invite." There were 3 chairs at the head of the table. The red and white queens had already taken 2 of them, but the middle one was empty. Alice sat down in it, rather uncomfortably at the silence, and longing for someone to speak. At last, the Red Queen began. "You've missed the soup and fish," she said. "Put on the joint." And the waiters set a leg of mutton before Alice, who looked at it rather anxiously. She had never had to carve a joint before. "You look a little shy. Let me introduce you to the leg of mutton," said the Red Queen. "Alice, mutton, mutton, Alice." The leg of mutton got up in the dish and made a little bow to Alice, and Alice returned the bow, not knowing whether to be frightened or amused. "May I give you a slice?" she said, taking up the knife and fork and looking from the Queen to the other. "Oh, certainly not," the Red Queen said very decidedly. "It isn't etiquette to cut anyone you've been introduced to. Remove the joint!" And the waiters carried it off and brought a large plum pudding in its place. "Oh, I won't be introduced to the pudding, please," Alice said rather hastily. "We shall get no dinner at all. May I give you some?" But the Red Queen looked sulky and growled. "Pudding, Alice, Alice, pudding. Remove the pudding!" And the waiters took it away so quickly that Alice couldn't return its bow. However, she didn't see why the Red Queen should be the only one to give orders, so as an experiment she called out, "Waiter, bring back the pudding." And there it was again in a moment, like a conjuring trick. It was so large that she couldn't help feeling a little shy with it, as she had been with the mutton. However, she conquered her shyness by a great effort and cut a slice and handed it to the Red Queen. "What impertinence!" said the pudding. "I wonder how you'd like it if I were to cut a slice out of you, you creature." They spoke in a thick, suety sort of voice, and Alice hadn't a word to say in reply. She could only sit and look at it and gasp. "Make a remark," said the Red Queen. "It's ridiculous to leave all the conversation to the pudding." "Do you know, I've had such a quantity of poetry repeated to me today," Alice began, a little frightened at finding that the moment she opened her lips there was dead silence and all eyes were fixed upon her. And it's a very curious thing. I think every poem was about fishes in some way. Do you know why they're so fond of fishes all about here?" She spoke to the Red Queen, whose answer was a little wide of the mark. "As to fishes," she said, very slowly and solemnly, putting her mouth close to Alice's ear, "Her White Majesty knows a lovely riddle, all in poetry, all about fishes. Shall she repeat it?" "Her Red Majesty is very kind to mention it," the White Queen murmured into Alice's other ear, in a voice like the cooing of a pigeon. "It would be such a treat. May I?" "Oh, please do," Alice said very politely. The White Queen laughed with delight and stroked Alice's cheek. Then she began. "First the fish must be caught. That is easy. A baby, I think, could have caught it. Next the fish must be bought. That's easy. A penny, I think, would have bought it. Now cook me the fish. That is easy and will not take more than a minute. Let it lie in a dish. That is easy because it already is in a dish. Bring it here, let me sup. It is easy to set a dish on the table. Take the dish cover up. That is so hard that I fear I'm unable. For it holds it like glue, holds the lid to the dish while it lies in the middle. Which is easiest to do? Undish cover the fish or dish cover the riddle? Take a minute to think about it and then guess. said the Red Queen. "Meanwhile, we'll drink to your health." "Queen Alice's health!" she screamed at the top of her voice, and all the guests began drinking it directly, and very queerly they managed it. Some of them put their glasses upon their heads like extinguishers and drank all that trickled down their faces. Others upset the decanters and drank the wine as it ran off the edges of the table. And 3 of them, who looked like kangaroos, scrambled into the dish of roast mutton and began eagerly lapping up the gravy, just like pigs in a trough, thought Alice. "You ought to return thanks in a neat speech," the Red Queen said, frowning at Alice as she spoke. "We must support you, you know," the White Queen whispered, as Alice got up to do it, very obediently, but a little frightened. "Oh, thank you very much," she whispered in reply, "but I can do quite well without." "That wouldn't be at all the thing," the Red Queen said very decidedly, so Alice tried to submit to it with a good grace. "And they did push so," she said afterwards when she was telling her sister the history of the feast. "You would have thought they wanted to squeeze me flat." In fact, it was rather difficult for her to keep in her place while she made her speech. The 2 queens pushed her so, one on each side, that they nearly lifted her up into the air. "I rise to return thanks," Alice began, and she really did rise as she spoke, several inches, but she got hold of the edge of the table and managed to pull herself down again. "Take care of yourself," screamed the White Queen, seizing Alice's hair with both hands. "Something's going to happen." And then, as Alice afterwards described it, all sorts of things happened in a moment. The candles all grew up to the ceiling, looking something like a bed of rushes, with fireworks at the top. As to the bottles, they each took a pair of plates, which they hastily fitted on as wings, and so, with forks for legs, went fluttering about in all directions. And very like birds they look, Alice thought to herself, as well as she could in the dreadful confusion that was beginning. At this moment she heard a hoarse laugh at her side, and turned to see what was the matter with the White Queen. But instead of the Queen, there was the leg of mutton sitting on the chair. "Here I am!" cried a voice from the soup tureen, and Alice turned again just in time to see the Queen's broad, good-natured face grinning at her for a moment over the edge of the tureen before she disappeared into the soup. There was not a moment to be lost. Already several of the guests were lying down in the dishes, and the soup ladle was walking up the table towards Alice's chair, and beckoning to her impatiently to get out of its way. "I can't stand this any longer," she cried as she jumped up and seized the tablecloth with both hands. One good pull, and plates, dishes, guests, and candles came crashing down together in a heap on the floor. "And as for you," she went on, turning fiercely upon the Red Queen, whom she considered as the cause of all this mischief. But the Queen was no longer at her side. She had suddenly dwindled down to the size of a little doll, and was now on the table, merrily running round and round after her own shawl, which was trailing behind her. At any other time, Alice would have felt surprised at this, but she was far too much excited to be surprised at anything now. "As for you," she repeated, catching hold of the little creature in the very act of jumping over a bottle which had just lighted upon the table, "I'll shake you into a kitten, that I will."